Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be taking a look at yet another top 15 list. This week we're going to be taking a look at the top 15 best JRPGs available on the Nintendo Switch as of this video. And really, I would say the Nintendo Switch has become a bit of a powerhouse for these JRPGs. Debatably, the Nintendo Switch might even be the best place to play JRPGs. And that's not necessarily just because of the library itself, but also its form factor. I've always felt that this genre in specific just feels perfect on a handheld device. But the big question now, though, is what are some of the best JRPGs that you can play on the Nintendo Switch as of this video? And that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Now, keep in mind that all of this is only my opinion, and if I miss any of your favorites, make sure to let me know in the comments below. But without a further ado, let's just go and jump right into the video. And to start this list off, I actually have a Wii U port here being Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Now, when Tokyo Mirage Sessions originally released for the Wii U, this was a good game that was quietly overlooked because, well, you know, it was on the Wii U. That wasn't necessarily the most mainstream device in the world, but thankfully, Nintendo gave this game a second chance by bringing it over to the Switch, and what a great choice that was, because this really is one of the better JRPGs that you can play on the Switch as of this moment. The thing about this game, though, is that it's actually a combination of the Shin Megami Tensei franchise with Fire Emblem. That's an interesting combination, but it does work really well here. It does have some Fire Emblem characters in it, though I would say that it has more in common with the Persona franchise than anything else, but that's not a bad thing at all. Fans have been wanting more Persona games for quite a while on that Nintendo Switch, and well, you do have Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which has a fun overall story, especially if you like J-pop or anime, and it's got good turn-based combat. Really, it's just a good overall JRPG, but if you are looking for a Persona game, I'd also go ahead and recommend Persona 5 Strikers for the Nintendo Switch. And here I have Octopath Traveler, and right away, the very first thing that everybody seems to notice about this game is its stunning visual art style. It's this blend of your modern HD graphics with your retro-style pixel art. It really does look amazing in motion, but it goes beyond that because Octopath Traveler is also a really fun turn-based RPG. This game was heavily inspired by games like Final Fantasy VI, and I would say in terms of its turn-based combat, it really is probably top of its class. It's always a lot of fun where you try to exploit your enemy weaknesses. Where Octopath Traveler is unique, though, is in how it tells its story. Instead of playing as a singular character trying to save the universe, you actually have 8 separate characters with their own personal individual stories. You can complete these stories in any order that you want, and some of the stories are really interesting. Unfortunately, though, even though these characters do travel with each other to accomplish their goals, they don't really interact with each other throughout their stories. I felt like they could have done a little bit more with the story here, but nonetheless, it's still a fun game, and some of the stories are still very interesting. From the very beginning, Ni no Kuni just completely absorbs you into its world. Thanks to its emotional introduction, you get invested into its story and world right from the get-go. And it sets you off on this grand adventure where it just brings up this childlike wonder out in you. It does have that Studio Ghibli-esque art style, which is beautiful to watch in motion. The story's always heartfelt and genuine, and really, it's just a magical experience from beginning to end. But then there's also the gameplay, which has this monster catching mechanic to it. It's kind of like Pokemon in some ways, where you have to catch different monsters, you evolve them to get more powerful, and then you fight with your monster. But you being the trainer, or in this case, a wizard, you can fight alongside your monsters in action-based combat. It's actually an interesting take, and I think it works pretty well. Now, if you're just looking for a good story, then Tales of Vesperia is one you definitely might want to try out. Now, the Tales of franchise, for the most part, has been good throughout the years, as this is a long-running JRPG, but I would say that Tales of Vesperia has always been my favorite, in specific because of that story, or really to just go a step further, it's because of the characters. I would actually say that the characters in general with Tales of Vesperia are some of my favorite characters in any video game ever, and a big part of that is because of how much chemistry they have with one another. I think that that's something that a lot of games don't quite get. Some games have really interesting stories and an interesting premise, but then they lack in chemistry. But here with Tales of Vesperia, you have an interesting story on top of really good characters with great chemistry. Now, I would also say that the gameplay is a lot of fun. You do set out on a grand adventure, you travel in an overworld, and then when it comes to its combat, it's action-based with you using different arts and combos in real-time combat. It gets the job done, but I think this game for sure is most memorable when it comes to its story and characters. Anytime you hear a list of the best JRPGs of all time, there's a very good chance that you hear about the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, and well, this is for a very good reason. Whether that be Persona or Shin Megami Tensei, these are excellent turn-based RPGs. They offer a challenge as well as good stories and characters. And debatably, the best in the entire franchise would be Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. Now, this one is a remaster of a PlayStation 2 game, so it's not necessarily going to be the best looking game on this list visually, but in terms of gameplay and its world, it sits among the top. This is a very challenging RPG where you recruit different monsters into your party, and you try to exploit your enemy weaknesses, but they can actually do the same thing to you, and you're going to be heavily rewarded or you're going to be heavily punished for the decisions you make in battle. If you are looking for a challenging RPG, though, with good atmosphere, then Nocturne HD is definitely a great choice. There's a reason that so many people list this as one of the best JRPGs of all time. Platinum Games has always been known to make really fun games, and well, the Nintendo Switch is actually one of the best places to play some of their better games. One being a Nintendo Switch exclusive, Astral Chain. Now, Astral Chain is this really unique action-based RPG. With a lot of action games, you can just simply hack and slash your way through, but you can't necessarily do that with Astral Chain because of how the combat works. So you're actually playing as two characters as once. You're going to have your protagonist that controls these different alien-like creatures by the name of legions. Each legion has their own abilities, but in combat you're going to be controlling both characters. You can swap your legions back and forth for different abilities, and it does make the combat a little bit more strategic. It sounds complicated on paper, but thanks to Platinum Games' smart implementation of this mechanic, it does work very well. I also think it has a beautiful art style that really pops out when you play it in handheld mode. I actually think it's one of the better looking handheld games that you can play on the Nintendo Switch as of this moment, and it also has an interesting story. I think really the only thing that I would have liked to see them do a little bit different is that it does have a silent protagonist. I would have rathered a voice protagonist, but overall it's still an interesting story nonetheless. Now here I have a combination of games being Fire Emblem Three Houses and then the Disgaea franchise. These are your strategy RPGs where you're going to have to outsmart your opponent by maneuvering across the different fields and then taking advantage of the environments around you. Outside of sharing similar styles of gameplay though, these games are actually quite a bit different. I just went ahead and combined these together just so I could compile as many games onto this list as I can, because both of these are really excellent JRPGs that are definitely worth checking out. You have Fire Emblem, which is going to be the more serious out of the two. This game has a ton of content. You can choose between one of three houses, all with their own individual stories. I mean, if you want to play through all three of the houses, I mean, you got like 150 plus hours of gameplay right there, if not even more than that. On top of that, you have a social aspect where you can bond with different characters in Fire Emblem Three Houses. And then there's the combat, which really is top of its class. With that in mind, though, if you like games like this, then you also need to check out the Disgaea franchise. The Disgaea franchise has similar style of gameplay, but with an insane level cap. And that's kind of the thing about this particular franchise, because it never really takes itself too serious. The stories are just kind of goofy all around, but they're always a lot of fun. Over the years, The World Ends With You has become a bit of a cult classic. This game did originally release back on the Nintendo DS, but since then has been ported to several other devices, including the Nintendo Switch. Truthfully, even though the control scheme is different now, it's still a good game and something that I would highly recommend. But the great news here is that Neo: The World Ends With You has finally arrived. This is the sequel that fans have been asking for years and years, and well, the wait was well worth it. It once again is set in Shibuya, Tokyo, and like the first game, it also has a colorful cast of characters and an overall enjoyable story. This is something that Nioh does very well. But the biggest changes here are actually when it comes to the world itself. While you do once again play in Shibuya, Tokyo, this is set in a 3D environment with set camera angles. The set camera angles does make Nioh feel a little more old school than some of your more modern games, but that's kind of the thing when it comes to this game. It is just a little bit different than other games in the market, and that goes with its art style and gameplay as well. The way the combat works is that you have to find these different pins that you attach to your characters, and these pins are actually attacks, so you can really mix and match these characters and how you prefer to play. It's a really unique take, and just kind of add a little bit more depth to it. You can actually level up and even evolve these pins over time. And well, there's over 300 pins, so there's a lot of depth there. Now here I have a game that's technically not a JRPG because it wasn't developed in Japan, but this game was in fact heavily inspired by a JRPG, one of the most beloved JRPGs of all time, being Paper Mario. And that game would be Bug Fables. Bug Fables is an excellent turn-based RPG, and I would go so far as to say that Bug Fables is the best Paper Mario experience since Paper Mario: A Thousand Year Door. But beyond Bug Fables' obvious inspiration, this is just an overall good game. First off, I think that it has an overall enjoyable story with lovable and charming characters. That was a little bit of a surprise to me, but I really did enjoy the story from beginning to end. And an even bigger surprise to me was this game actually can be quite challenging if you put it on hard difficulty. When it comes to combat, you do have different button inputs that you can do during attacks to make your attacks a little bit stronger, and because this game can be challenging, you're going to have to use some real strategy. This was a welcome surprise that adds to the already well-crafted world. And that's also something to keep in mind because with Bug Fables, there's going to be some puzzles that you have to solve along the way using different abilities that you gain throughout the game. So to just kind of top everything off, it's also fun to explore the world of Bug Fables. And so just from top to bottom, I really think that Bug Fables is a great overall game. Sometimes it's easy to forget that Pokemon is actually a JRPG, and not only is this one of the most successful JRPGs ever made, but it's also one of the most successful franchises ever made, and that's for a very good reason. The Pokemon franchise as a whole just has so much content, and really I don't think that there's many games that can compete with this sheer amount of content that the Pokemon franchise has. I mean, there's hundreds of different monsters that you can capture, breed, evolve, level up. There's tons of attacks. You have held items. You can trade, and there's just so much content when it comes to the Pokemon franchise. Now, these games might not always necessarily excel when it comes to their stories per se, but in terms of gameplay, it's just so addicting and so rewarding, especially if you want to dive a little bit deeper into the Pokemon franchise. And that's kind of the thing about these games. The Pokemon franchise is easily accessible. Almost anybody can pick up and play these games and enjoy them from the get-go. But competitively is an entirely different story. Thanks to the wide array of choice that you have when it comes to the Pokemon franchise, there is a lot of depth when it comes to the competitive side of Pokemon. And here I have Bravely Default 2, which for you fans out there that maybe have grown a little bit frustrated with the direction that the Final Fantasy franchise has taken with that more action-driven style of combat, then Bravely Default 2 is the perfect alternative to play. And the reason I say that is because, technically, the Bravely Default franchise started as a Final Fantasy game. They later on decided to make it into its own new IP, but because of that, Bravely Default does share a lot in common with your more traditional style of Final Fantasy games, especially games like Final Fantasy IV. And there's a lot of depth when it comes to the combat in Bravely Default 2. You do have various jobs at your disposal, and in fact, you can actually combine 2 jobs for any given character. You have a main class and then a subclass, meaning if you want to have your main class as a black mage and then you want to have your subclass as a monk, well, you can absolutely do that. Mixing and matching all of the different abilities just adds so much complexity when it comes to this combat in this game. And then with an added layer, you do have that Brave default system. And the way that works is that each character can use multiple actions per turn by using the Brave system. Or you can use default, which puts your character into defensive mode and banks an action so they can later use another turn. It sounds simple on paper, but it does add an extra layer of strategy, and you're going to need it because this is actually a very challenging game, especially when it comes to the boss encounters. Now, with that in mind, because it is challenging, this game's also going to require some grinding. Not everybody likes the grind, but if you do want a challenging experience, then Bravely Default 2 has one of the better combat systems that I've seen in JRPGs. Nintendo's known for a lot of different franchises, whether it be Mario, you have Zelda, you have the Pokemon franchise, but one franchise that they have been working on over the last decade is one that's quietly one of their better entries, and that would be the Xenoblade franchise. And on the Nintendo Switch, you do have Xenoblade, the Definitive Edition, and then you have Xenoblade 2, both in which are excellent RPGs for their unique gameplay, expansive worlds, and rich stories. These games really are the whole package, but the question you might be asking is which one is better? Which one should you jump into? And really, I think that you could just jump into either one of these games and enjoy them because both of them are excellent in their own ways. I will say that I think that the first one has a little bit better of a story, but overall, I mean, this first and second game, they have these immersive worlds, they have great characters, they have interesting stories. I really find the combat unique in how it works. It's this real-time action type of combat where you can choose different attacks and they're all on cooldowns, and it works really well. The thing about these games is that they're just set up so well in how their world works. The worlds in these games are very detailed and expansive, and there is a large emphasis on exploration. And if you are into that type of stuff, then you're going to love Xenoblade. It's no secret that Monster Hunter has just risen in popularity in recent years with the introduction of Monster Hunter World. But now, with the Nintendo Switch, it's gotten its own console-exclusive Monster Hunter game being Monster Hunter Rise. And debatably, in terms of gameplay, this is one of the best Monster Hunter entries yet. A large part of that is because the additional ability that you have in Monster Hunter Rise. You do have the wire bug that not only allows you to zip across different landscapes, but also helps you while you're in battle with these large and creative monsters. It's a lot of fun to play around with and just adds an extra little layer to the already excellent combat that Monster Hunter is known for. Then you also have the Palamutes, which you can actually ride from location to location, and it just gets you in and out of these battles much quicker. Monster Hunter Rise has more verticality than ever before, and, well, you know what? It's just as addictive as it's ever been. But that's not quite all because, well, the Nintendo Switch also has Monster Hunter Stories 2. And unlike Rise, this game is actually quite a bit different with turn-based combat instead, with more of an emphasis on its story. Now, in Stories 2, instead of just simply fighting all of these different monsters, you can actually capture them and have them fight alongside you. It's almost this weird combination of the Pokemon franchise with Monster Hunter, and that sounds odd on paper, but you know what? It just works. This may be a spin-off, but it brings the same high quality that the franchise has always been known for. And here I have Dragon Quest XI and then Dragon Quest Builders 2. Again, both in which are actually very different games from the same franchise. I always like to try to compile as many games on these lists as I possibly can, because really that's why I make these lists. I want to help you find good games to play, and I think both Dragon Quest XI as well as Builders 2 are good games in their own right. Now, Dragon Quest XI is going to be more of your traditional style of JRPG, and in fact, this game feels like it came directly from the 1990s. Now, a lot of these bigger, long-running JRPG franchises have actually went more in the direction of action-driven style of combat, but with Dragon Quest XI is stuck to its roots. And ironically, I think that helps Dragon Quest XI stand out just that much more. This game does feel old school, but that's not a bad thing at all. If you've ever noticed, old school JRPGs have aged incredibly well, and Dragon Quest is living proof of that. It sets you out on a grand adventure, it's got a beautiful, timeless art style, and it's got nice, strategic, turn-based combat. If you do like old-school JRPGs, then Dragon Quest XI is a must-own game. Now, as for Dragon Quest Builders 2, this game is actually more similar to something like Minecraft, where you build different things, but even then, this is a legitimate JRPG. It does have a real story, you can level up your character, and really, I had a lot more fun in this game than I was ever expecting, and it's a bit of a hidden gem by this point, but I would highly recommend that game as well. And at the number one spot, I have none other than the Final Fantasy franchise. Now, if you've noticed on this list, several games was inspired by the Final Fantasy franchise, and well, that's for good reason. That's because these games are timeless classics. And there was really not many games that has just captivated audiences the way the Final Fantasy franchise has. I mean, if you take a look at the Final Fantasy franchise, they've made some of the most beloved characters ever in any video game, and then they also have interesting plots and beautifully detailed and made worlds, and then just pair that with extraordinary music. These games from top to bottom are nothing short of captivating. But that's kind of the thing, though, because when you have these great characters, you have an interesting plot, you have all of these things working coalescent of one another, well, what just kind of pulls this all together is the execution. Somehow they've executed in the direction of these games, and in each new year, it seems like the Final Fantasy fandom just kind of grows because new fans are coming every single year. They go back and they play these games made from the 90s, and they still just absolutely love them. And that shows you just how good these games truly are. That is one of the big questions when it comes to Final Fantasy, though. Which Final Fantasy game is the best? And honestly, I can't tell you that, because if you ask 5 different people, there's a good chance that all 5 will tell you something completely different, because everybody has their own favorite Final Fantasy game. Now, each game does have their own stories, their own characters, so you can jump into whichever entry that you want, but really, there's just so many great entries in this franchise. Now, I will say that my 2 favorites are 7 and 8, but really, you can go out and play 9, 10, 12. World of Final Fantasy is good, and there's also Final Fantasy 15 Pocket Edition available on the Nintendo Switch, and again, these are just timeless classics for a reason. Anyways, though, that's it for this list, but if I missed any of your favorite games, make sure to let me know in the comments below. With that said, if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.